Howdy how. Welcome back, you guys. All right, we are coming down to the wire, almost finishing up our How High the Moon. Oh my gosh, my chair is just not in the right spot. Woo, there we go. Okay, so How High the Moon, written by Karen Parsons. What on earth is happening? Okay, first of all, Myrna and her friend Johnny, I think his name is, tried to get a message to George, who is in jail. He is being accused of murdering those two little girls, right? So they rode their bike down the train tracks and got some rocks and tied some letters around rocks and threw it through the jail, through the bars in the jail. And yeah, tried to get it in there. They don't know if he got it. They're hoping nobody else gets it because that's not what they want. They want George to get it, to know that he is not alone, that nobody's given up on him, that they are thinking about him and they know he is innocent. That's what they want. What else is happening? Ooh, Ella lost it at home, right? She was shucking the corn and doing the peas and she lost it. She lost her mind. She threw the stuff down and she asked Poppy, "Is Mr. Parker my dad?" And everybody was kind of quiet. And then she took off running. Now it's nighttime, dangerous. Don't want her running around outside at night, right? Clans after people. What else is happening? Henry's finding his voice, his strength. He stood up to Ben. He also realized Ben is getting bullied and abused by his brother at home, right? And so he made the comparison. Okay, so this is like one of those wow aha moments, right? So, because it sticks in my head and I want to share it with you. So he made the comparison. He said that his grandpa always said that people like beat mean dogs, right? So they they try to control a dog by beating it. And then the dog, though, will listen to the person that's beating it. But what does the dog do to everyone else? It's really mean to everyone else. And so he was saying that it was the same thing with Ben, and that maybe Ben was like that, right? Like Ben's the bully. But if Ben is getting beaten at home by his older brother, right, what happens is he's going to snap and lash out at everybody else. So he wasn't necessarily, oh, my dog, he wasn't necessarily excusing Ben's behavior, but he was giving a reason behind it, okay, which is very different. Like it's okay to say like, hey, this is why something is happening. It doesn't make it okay though. So that was one of the things that happened. Ella's changing, right? She was not happy about her mom. Her mom took off to New York City without her. And so that like adoration and love, right? She always had her mom on this like pedestal. That pedestal is gone. She doesn't see her mom in the same way anymore. And she's just trying to figure out who she is. And now she thinks that Mr. Parker, who happens to be white, which in the 1940s is a very big deal, right? Interracial couples did not exist back then. And if they did, it was not celebrated, right? None of that like love is love is love is love kind of business that we have today, which is amazing, right? Like, yay, love is love. Love who you want. That's not how it was. It's not how it used to be. So that would have been a big deal, and it would have been a big deal if that would mean that Ella's identity would change, right? Now she's half white, half black, if that is the case. We don't have confirmation, though. There has been no confirmation that this is true. Only speculation, which means assumptions, and we all know what assumptions mean, right? It's not the full truth. We don't know yet, so we got to find out. How do we find out? We got to read. All right, Miss Ella took off running. Let's see where she went. Here we go. They lied to me. All of them. Granny, Poppy, Mama, Mr. Parker. They all knew and they lied. Can you blame her for being mad? I can't. I couldn't stop. Couldn't stop my legs from moving forward. I couldn't stop my wailing, silent against the downpour. The rain drowned all sounds, all thoughts, all tears. I didn't know where I was going or when I'd go home. I just knew I needed to move, to go, to do something. But what could I really do? I couldn't run from it. It just was. It had always been. I lifted my face to the sky and let it pour over me. Ella Louise Parker. And I had a sister, Millie. All this time, I could have been a big sister to her. I could have fixed her hair for her and taught her how to do things. What would I teach her? I'd never been a big sister. I always was the youngest. Annie was about the same age as Millie. I tried to think of what George had taught his little sister. I wondered where Amy was now. Did she know that her brother was in prison? Did she know why? What did they tell her when she cried at night? I had so many questions swarming in my head. What did it mean for me to be half white? I sure didn't feel no different. I'd been colored my whole life. Some folks I knew, they hated white folks more than the devil himself, said white folks was mean and evil and that they couldn't help themselves, that it was in the blood. I had white blood in me. Was I evil? I didn't feel evil, but maybe I was. All I knew for certain was that I was mad. All of them had lied to me. When the rain finally stopped, I stared up into the sky and searched for the first stars of the night. There still must have been a layer of clouds, 'cause I couldn't make out any, just black night. The birds were silent, the street calm. I stopped running. I stopped crying. I left the road and walked a while through the fresh stillness of the woods, focused only on the sounds of the squish of the mud. My mind rested. My clothes were glued to my body, completely soaked through. I was dripping, a little cold and ready to sit. Soon I was at Creek's clearing. The sound of the water lapping gently across the rocks soothed me. White light bounced over the creek's black surface. The moon pushed itself a little closer through the clouds. I sat beside the creek, the wet earth on the back of my thighs. Finally, the moon came out fully. So did the stars, like brilliant white glitter. I caught a shooting star's brief trail and closed my eyes. So many questions and thoughts filled my head, but no wish would come. Only one other person could feel so alone. I thought of George, all by himself in that cold cell. If George had a window in his cell, maybe he was looking out the window at this very moment. Maybe he saw the same shooting star and made a wish. Maybe we were both staring at the same moon high in the glittery sky. Tree frogs chirped. A nearby barn owl screeched. I let the familiar sounds wash over me and through me. And then the voice broke the moment. Wandering alone at night? What happened, girl? You lose your way home? I didn't recognize the voice, but when I turned, I saw those pocked cheeks and sneery top lip. I remembered him. He was the same fella me and Henry saw right there at the creek before I went to Boston. Same white boy who'd thumped my hat and talked mean. Only this time he had a couple of friends with him. All of them were muddy and soaked through. I'm nervous. How does this make you feel? Do you think this is a good thing? Ella's out there by herself, all by that creek. All of a sudden, that mean, nasty white boy is there. We already know they're looking for people of color, right? They got their eyes set on him, and he's not alone. He's got friends. I was certain these white boys didn't live anywhere near here. I'd have known them. Sometimes troublemakers come across the tracks looking to have fun messing with the colored folks, but I suspected this was something different. I suspected these boys had come to the colored part of town on account of George Steiny. I stood and peeled my skirt from the back of my legs. The boy doing the talking was taller than I was. His friends were stockier, but both wearing matching scowls. No, sir. I kept my eyes on the ground and began to walk past them, away from the creek. I ain't done with you, he said sharply. I turned back to him without looking up. What kind of girl is out walking by herself after dark? You looking for some kind of trouble?" "No, sir," I said. "Looks to me like she wants some kind of trouble." He looked briefly at each of his friends, then turned back to me. "What you all think?" "I think she does," one of them said before spitting. "Maybe she just likes the rain," said the other one, and they all shared a hollow laugh. Even with my head bent, looking at the mud under our feet, I could feel their eyes on me. They liked me like this, crouched over and afraid. "I have to go," I said, and continued walking. "I bet you's friends with that boy that killed them white girls," he spat as I passed. I felt them behind me, following. "That boy gonna fry. That's if we don't string him up first." I kept moving forward. I had to get out of the woods and onto the road. "I said I wasn't through with you," he called. My breaths were short and I was trembling, but I kept on walking. I was quietly praying they'd just back off and go about getting their kicks somewhere else. I told my legs to keep moving. The stirring of leaves and branches on the ground and their whispering voices behind me told me that they were still there. They weren't letting me go, and they were getting closer. Just as I'd cleared the woods and saw the road out in front of me, I felt a sharp burn across my scalp as I was yanked backwards by my braids. I don't think he meant to throw me onto the ground, but he pulled me back with such a force that I lost my footing, and he lost the grip on my hair. Rocks and branches tore at the skin on my bare thigh. Quickly, the bullies huddled over me, blocking out the moon's light and any sort of escape. I kicked at them wildly and heard one of them laugh. "Fighter, huh?" one of them said just before kicking me deep in the stomach, knocking all of the wind out of me. I gasped, and as strong as the pain was in my gut, I still tried to stand to get away. Again, I felt that sharp sting on my scalp as one of them grabbed my braids while another grabbed my arm, and they dragged me through the mud. I squirmed violently, swatted at their hands, screaming the entire time, "Get off of me! Let me go!" The gurgling of the creek began to fill my ears, and I realized they were dragging me closer to the water. I twisted and I turned my body hard, trying to make their hands come loose, but it didn't do nothing. Finally, at the edge of the creek, they stopped. One of them dropped my arm, but the other, with my hair in his hands, pushed my face down into the mud. I reached up for his arm and dug my nails deep into his skin. He beat my hand away and yanked my head up. "We gonna teach you a lesson," he said, and he pushed my face into the mud again. I jerked my head to the side to catch air. The earth was in my eyes, my mouth, my nose. Again, I clawed at his arm, but quickly felt a boot kick my hand and then settle itself in the middle of my back, pushing my belly and chest firmly into the ground. I could barely breathe. And then, when everything was splashing and slapping and the blood in my head was racing and my lungs had screamed out all the breath they had had in them, everything went quiet. He let go of my head. He pulled his arm away. The boot let up off my back. There was another struggle, but this time it was the boys who were squealing. A man's voice cut through the wailing. It was strong and firm like poppies. It was a voice I'd heard before. "Get," he hollered. "Get on out of here." There was a brief skirmish, stumbling through the mud and branches and bushes. The man shouted after them. "You best get on home to your mamas," he said. "Go on now, beat it." I knew that voice. It was the voice from Mama's record. JP. You guys, that was so intense. That was the end of the chapter. I don't want to leave it like that, though. I want to go more. So, just like I predicted, right? I thought this was really bad news that Ella was out there by herself. And sure enough, it was super bad news. She's so lucky that Mr. Parker came by. We're also very lucky that it wasn't Poppy. Okay, had it been a black man that had saved her, there would be even more trouble, right? So we are so lucky that that is Mr. Parker, who is a white man, saved her, because otherwise those boys would have run off and we would have had a huge problem on our hands, because they would have said they were attacked by a black man, even though they were just now trying to kill Ella. We don't know for sure that they were trying to kill her, but I'm pretty sure that wasn't like just trying to scare her. They're mad because two little girls were murdered, and sometimes when you're blind mad like that, an eye for an eye is the only way to go. All right, let's go one more. See what happens. Oh, we're so close. This is Ella. Mr. Parker wrapped me in an old quilt he must have used to cover the bed of his truck on dry days. It smelled like the rest of the beat-up vehicle, like motor oil and dirty clothes. I had washed myself some in the icy cold creek to clean up my legs and arms a bit, but my cuts and scratches stung, and my entire body was sore. Even my scalp throbbed. It took me a while to finally begin to get warm again. I leaned into the passenger door with my face out the window, letting the familiar night air brush my face and calm me. Most of the ride, we didn't say a word to each other. A song scratched in and out of the radio, the melody kinda nice, but the voice impossible to hear. "Let me see how those scrapes look now," he said, indicating my forearms. I held up my arms. They were torn and still bleeding, thin streams slowly making their way to my elbows, dripping onto the old quilt. It was the skin on the back of my thighs that was throbbing most, but I wasn't about to turn around and show him my backside. "Okay," he said, reaching past me to the glove compartment. Then he found a small, dry rag. "Here, that ain't so bad. Granny'll fix 'em right up." I dabbed at my wounds, then pressed the cloth on a particularly deep one, holding it there so the bleeding would stop. I stole a look at Mr. Parker. His eyes were narrowed and intense as he looked out at the road. I guess he could feel me looking because he turned to me. I had to turn away. My eyes landed on a photograph taped to the dashboard next to the steering wheel. It was Millie Parker and her mother. They were wearing matching smiles. A flower, long ago dried up, was taped down at its corner. I'd seen folks tape up pictures of their loved ones in cars before. They put 'em where they could see 'em to make 'em smile during a bad day, to remind them that there's someone at home that loves them. Someone that they love most of all. He was both looking out onto the road, the lone truck's headlights cutting through the black night. I turned to him. "How'd you meet my mama?" I asked. "Lucille?" He looked at me and his eyes brightened. "Heck, I guess we'd known each other in one way or another our whole lives. She and her sister used to come into the shop with Granny all the time when we was just kids. Wasn't till we was grown, though, that we came to really know each other." We hit a pothole and I bounced in my seat. The truck's whole body squeaked with the jolt. "Music brought us together," he went on. "I saw her take stage at the Feline Club in Charleston one night. Amateur night. They'd let anybody get up and try out their talents on a real crowd. I thought about Mom on the stage in Boston. Back in Charleston, did she shimmy? Did she sneak out of the house with a fancy dress underneath her overcoat? She was good." He laughed and looked at me, nodding. "Yes," I said, "Lucille, you gotta let me record you." I was trying my hand at recording engineering at the time. "I know. I heard the record," I said, picturing Mama and Mr. Parker in love. Strangely enough, it wasn't so hard to imagine. "Oh, yeah?" His mind drifted off down the road again. We both had big dreams. He laughed and shook his head to himself. We passed through a rough patch of craters and crevices in the road. More bumps. I held on to the window frame. Had plans to go to New York and try my hand at the big time, but 2 weeks before I was to go, my daddy died. He took in a long breath, remembering. So much to tend to, and there was no one else to run the shop, so. What about Mama? I asked. Well, by that time, I'd come back to town. Your Mama had already left for Boston. She just couldn't wait to get up there. And what about me? My voice was trembling as I asked. Mr. Parker turned to smile at me. You? Well, first time I laid eyes on you, you was just a fat little thing. But didn't you all want to see each other no more? I interrupted. Mr. Parker turned to me, brow twisted. What do you mean? Well, didn't you love her? As soon as the words escaped my lips, I wanted to shove 'em back in my mouth. It was the way he looked at me, the way he'd asked me what I meant. My whole face caught fire. Suddenly, I felt embarrassed for what I was thinking. For all my screaming and crying, for having run off into the woods after dark and getting myself in trouble, Mr. Parker had come out there to help. He'd rescued me from them boys, but I'd had it all wrong. Didn't I what? He looked at me, confused at first, but then his eyes widened and he took in a deep breath. He turned his eyes back to the road and let out a heavy sigh. We drove in silence a bit before he turned to look at me, but I couldn't meet his eyes. You think I'm your daddy, Ella? I felt so stupid. Well, I explained, I found a letter in Mama's record that was signed JP. I just thought that maybe, when I heard you on the record, I just thought. Mr. Parker didn't say nothing. He'd looked back at the road and the black night. I could see that he was frowning a little and chewing on his lip. He'd gone deep into a thought, and it was a full minute before he seemed to remember I was sitting there next to him. The week before your Mama took the stage on amateur night, she came into the store with Rhoda. I hadn't seen Lucy or Rhoda, for that matter, in some time. She, your Mama, was so different from that last time I'd seen her. Had grown so much. I guess we all had. We all got to talking and laughing. I never knew how funny she was. Really witty and well pretty. Your Mama's got a real smile on her. He looked down the road like he was watching a memory. I didn't wind up at amateur night by coincidence. I'd overheard them talking about it, and I'd made a point of being there to hear her sing. And I guess I was just about as smitten as every other fella in that club that night. He let out a chuckle. I got her into the studio, and I think we made one heck of a record. To thank me for recording her, she planted a tree in my honor of my mother when she passed. He said, yes, we did become friends, but I'm not your father, honey. The radio had given up scratching out sound and resorted to static. Mr. Parker switched the thing off, leaving just the squeaky of the rusty truck and my sniffling. A ways in front of us, a red fox darted across the road. As the truck passed its path, I tried to make it out in the dark, but could only hear the pleading squeal of a cottontail. Well, I searched Mr. Parker's face. Surely he could tell me the truth. Did you know him? Did you know my daddy? His face was sad. He shook his head. I'm sorry, Ella, he said. The tears came easily. I don't know who he is, I said. I need to know. We were turning down my driveway. Look at me, Ella. I calmed my breath and turned my face to Mr. Parker. He slowed the truck and put it in gear. Maybe the fact that he didn't stick around is all you need to know. Granny came out to the porch just as we pulled up. She wrapped her arms tight around her body as if to keep out a chill, though it wasn't the least bit cold. She looked fragile as a mended teacup. You know you got your Mama's fire in you, don't you, girl? Mr. Parker took my chin in his hand and smiled at me. I felt myself blush a little. It ain't your loss. You never got to know who your daddy is. It's his loss that he never got to know you. Makes me want to cry. A long silver chain carrying a medallion hung from the review mirror. Mr. Parker pulled it free and handed it to me. The carving was a man carrying a staff in one hand and a child on his back. That's St. Christopher, the patron saint of travelers and children. Ever seen one? He asked. Shook my head. I ran my fingers over the metal ridges, over the man's face, staring watchfully over the child. I took the medallion out to Mr. Parker, but he didn't take it from me. No, I want you to keep that. Even the toughest of us need a little protection now and then, he said. Poppy, Myrna, and Henry all poured out of the house. Go on now. Your family's waiting for you. I pushed open the stubborn, squeaky door and climbed out. No more going out after dark, he said. I shook my head and pushed the heavy door closed. He nodded goodbye, and I did the same. I wanted to say more, but there was nothing more to say. I ran to Granny. With her arms wrapped around me, we watched the truck drive off. Red taillights disappearing into the black. Whew. All right, what are your guys' thoughts? So, Mr. Parker is not her daddy. I was wrong. He was JP, though. We were all right about that. But JP was not the daddy. And as the story was, as I was reading just now, I realized that right before she did. Like right as she was realizing it, I was like, wait, you know what? She's the one that made the assumption that JP was her dad. And she was trying to figure that out. So there's that. Thank goodness Mr. Parker came to save her. That is huge and intense. My wondering is, how did he know to look for her? Did somebody go tell him and ask him to go help? I don't know that we'll ever know that, but thank goodness that was happening. Well, we're almost done with our story. I can't wait to see how this wraps up and how it ends, or if it does, maybe it leaves it open for another book after this. Who knows? All right, guys, thank you for sharing some time in your day with me today. I appreciate you, and I hope you appreciate this book. All right, I'll see you guys tomorrow.